This class isn't for janitors, kids." The words fell like a cold stone. Their echo clung to the polished wooden steps of the lecture hall, drifting into the faint smell of wax on the freshly cleaned floor. Harvard's hall was wide and tall. Large windows opened to a pale autumn sky. Jackets rustled, pens tapped in rhythm. Everything here carried the weight of knowledge and distance. Noah Mercer sat in the very last row, his small frame swallowed by a t-shirt too big for him. The shirt's shoulders drooped down like a quiet attempt to hide. His shoes, patched with black tape, whispered flap flap with every move. He hugged an old notebook, its corners rounded from years of use. On the lined paper, he drew small grids and strange folds, not words, not formulas, only the slow, patient marks of a boy learning to breathe in a place that was not meant for him. At the front, Professor Adrian Clark adjusted his glasses. He held a piece of chalk, his voice steady but stretched tight, like the string of a wooden violin. "We continue with structures in vector spaces over the field of 3. The goal is simple to say, harder to solve. Avoid arithmetic progressions. No 3 points in a row, equally spaced, simple to describe. A nightmare to prove." A few students nodded. They knew the puzzle, a variation of the capsit problem. Clark wrote careful lines across the board. Imagine a grid colored with 3 values. We wish to select points so that no 3 lie in perfect alignment. It sounds like a child's puzzle, but it has defeated some of the finest minds. Noah listened with a kind of hunger. Every word felt like a drop of water falling on dry ground. He didn't understand all of it, but he caught the rhythm, the pulse of the problem. While Clark spoke of avoiding and choosing, Noah's mind whispered something different. What if you didn't avoid? What if the grid itself bent? What if the flat surface wasn't flat at all? A laugh broke the silence. The class had noticed the boy in the back row. Some were curious, some annoyed. Harvard was full of ambitious outsiders, but an 11-year-old child here was still strange. Marissa Hale, a second-year doctoral student, turned slightly in her seat. Her hair was tied back neatly, her eyes a soft brown that caught light. She wore a sweater the color of autumn leaves. She saw the boy, and her gaze was not pity, it was curiosity. Clark went on, adding history. He spoke of mathematicians who wrestled with the problem, who saw it as a contest between order and chaos. He said quietly, "Counting is not enough. We must see differently." Then he paused. The words slipped out like an old memory, then quickly faded as he turned back to his formulas. His eyes swept the lecture hall. They stopped on the last row. He noticed the taped shoes, the oversized shirt, the worn notebook. He knew. He had seen this boy in the halls waiting for his mother who pushed a cleaning cart. He did not hate the child, but Clark had learned, painfully, to close doors before they could open too wide. "You there," he said, chalk pointing. "Your name." The boy's voice was thin. "Noah, sir." "You're in the wrong place, Noah. This is not a room for children, and it is not for janitors' sons." His words were not shouted. They were calm, almost tired, but cold. The air dropped heavy. A stifled laugh died in someone's throat. Marissa frowned. She turned her full body toward the back row, studying Noah's face. The boy didn't flush red. He didn't glare. His skin paled just a little, like a candle flickering in the wind but refusing to go out. Noah rose from his seat. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. He closed his notebook, tucked the pencil into his shirt pocket, and slid toward the aisle. Before leaving, He placed a blank sheet of paper on the back desk. A habit of his, a silent promise to himself. Leave a mark, even if no one notices. The door closed. Out in the hallway, the smell of floor cleaner was stronger. Rachel Mercer bent over a stain near the wall, scrubbing with slow determination. Her frame was thin, her shoulders narrow, hair tied in a low knot. She moved with the patience of someone who had worked too many long hours without being seen. She looked up. "You were listening in again?" she asked softly. No scolding, just weary love. "I only sat at the back," Noah said. "I didn't make a sound." Rachel's eyes fell on his taped shoes. She sighed. "Come. I still have 2 more classrooms before lunch, and another shift tonight in Maxwell Hall. Sit outside and wait. Don't wander." Noah nodded. They passed a tall window. The light washed over his face, and in the glass he caught his own reflection, a small boy against the vast brick walls of Harvard. But in his mind he also saw a clean white board, waiting for him, his hand sketching folds across invisible dimensions. Inside the lecture hall, Clark kept writing neat lines of chalk. But the sentence he had spoken, "Not for janitor's sons," echoed inside him. He wasn't regretful, not exactly. He was afraid. Years ago, he had stood here daring to speak of new ways to see differently. The council had laughed, dismissed him, ended his hope of recognition. Since then, he had built walls around himself, teaching, but never dreaming. Marissa gathered her notes, but her eyes fell on the paper left at the back row. She picked it up. Not words, only faint pencil lines, like creases on folded paper. A curve swept across a grid, bending straight lines into arcs. She held it up to the light. A strange calm filled her chest. She didn't know the boy, but she knew this was not random doodling. It was a thought, a seed. At noon, in the staff lounge, Rachel opened a small plastic box. Half a sandwich, a few slices of apple. She gave one half to Noah. She asked if he was sad. He shook his head. "I heard something good," he said. They talked about choosing points, so no 3 are in line. I understood a little. I think maybe instead of choosing or avoiding, you fold the grid. When you fold, those points aren't in line anymore, because the line itself is bent. Rachel didn't follow the details, but she smiled faintly. "Explain like I'm in 1st grade." Noah nodded. "Imagine a sheet of paper. When it's flat, the lines are straight. If you fold the paper, the line becomes a curve. The 3 points that were once in a row aren't straight anymore. Folding is easier than running away." Rachel's eyes shone wet. Maybe it was the sting of the cleaning chemicals. Maybe it was the memory of Noah's father, a man who once said long ago that the world could be folded if you were gentle enough. She touched Noah's hair. "Eat, love. You need your strength." That afternoon, Noah sat on the steps of Maxwell Hall, his mother's staff badge dangling from his wrist like a little fish. He opened his notebook again, drew grids and folds. No strange symbols, no codes, just slow, careful lines, each one like a breath. Each fold, a quiet reminder, I have the right to think differently. Through the glass doors, he saw Clark walking. The professor's shoulders leaned forward as though bracing against invisible wind. Noah thought of the words from earlier. Harsh words, yes, but words could also be doors. Sometimes being pushed out was the only way to know how badly you wanted to return. Marissa passed by with a coffee in hand. She paused, then sat a respectful step away. "You're Noah," she said gently. "The boy from the back row." He nodded. "I'm sorry if I bothered anyone." "No," she said. "Sometimes people speak harshly out of fear, not hate, and sometimes they're wrong. Noah stayed quiet. He wasn't angry. He only wanted to understand. Marissa pulled a folded slip of paper from her pocket. "You left this." She held up his sketch. "Beautiful. Like your folding space." Noah smiled a small smile. "I only draw what I see." "Keep it," she said, handing it back. "And if you sit in that last row again tomorrow, I won't look away." Evening settled. The air smelled of dry leaves. Rachel finished her shift, hands raw from water and soap. She found Noah still waiting, the folded paper tucked safely in his pocket. That night, in their small, rented room, Noah lay awake. The dim bulb cast soft shadows on the ceiling. His mother breathed steadily after a long day. Noah opened his notebook and wrote one gentle question. What if the grid isn't flat? He folded the paper into quarters, smoothing the edges. Tomorrow, he would return. Not to force any door open, but simply to leave another folded note behind, like a seed waiting in the soil. And in Maxwell Hall, in the long, echoing corridors that smelled of wax and footsteps, no one noticed that a boy had left carrying a quiet flame. But at the back desk, where one blank page had once rested, there remained a small glow, like a promise stronger than any door that had been closed. Professor Adrian Clark arrived at Maxwell Hall before sunrise, as he often did. The air was crisp, and the courtyard was silent except for the hum of a leaf blower in the distance. Clark preferred the emptiness of early hours. It gave him the illusion that Harvard belonged to him alone, before the crowds arrived with their questions and ambitions. He climbed the marble steps, turned the brass handle, and entered the building. The smell of polish still lingered from the night cleaning crew. His shoes tapped on the tiled floor, echoing faintly. When he reached his office door, he noticed something unusual. A folded sheet of paper was tucked neatly under the doorframe. Clark paused. He frowned. He received many letters, requests for recommendations, drafts of theses, complaints about grading, but never like this. A note slipped under his door in the middle of the night felt intrusive. He bent down, picked it up. The paper was ordinary notebook stock, lined and slightly creased. He carried it inside, laid it flat on his desk, and unfolded it. For a long moment, he did not breathe. On the page was a hand-drawn diagram, a grid of points, like the integer lattice his students knew well, but over it swept a curved fold, bending straight lines into arcs. Alongside it were brief notations in pencil, small modular equations, the kind one might write when thinking of arithmetic progressions in finite fields. At the bottom, in handwriting small but steady, were 8 words. Maybe it's not about avoiding lines. Maybe it's about folding space. Clark sat heavily in his chair. He closed his eyes. He had spent most of his career circling the capset problem, the ancient riddle of how large a set of points could be placed in a grid without forming a simple 3-term arithmetic progression. Mathematicians attacked it with combinatorics, probability, Fourier analysis. Some had breakthroughs. Others failed spectacularly. Clark himself had once believed he was on the verge of something new, only to be dismissed, laughed out of a conference room, his paper rejected. Since then, he had buried his imagination beneath routine, and now a scrap of paper had whispered the very thought he once dared to believe. See differently, not count differently. The words on the page struck him like an echo from a younger version of himself. Folding space. It was not precise, not rigorous, but there was a seed of vision there. If the grid could be bent, topologically, geometrically, then avoidance was no longer the point. The structure itself changed. 3 points in a row could dissolve when the notion of a row itself shifted. Clark leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His pulse throbbed in his temple. "Who?" he muttered. "Who would write this?" A knock on the door startled him. He quickly folded the note, slipped it into the drawer of his desk, and locked it. "Come in," he called. Marissa Hale entered, holding a stack of papers. She wore a wool scarf despite the mild weather, her cheeks flushed from the cold outside. "Morning, Professor. I brought the drafts you asked for." "Leave them there," Clark said, his tone curt. She placed them on the edge of the desk. For a moment, she studied him, his jaw tight, his eyes restless. She sensed something unsettled in him, though she said nothing. "Will you be in lecture later?" she asked. "Yes. 10 o'clock sharp," he replied. She nodded, offered a small smile, and left. When the door closed, Clark opened the drawer again and pulled out the note. He read it once more. The handwriting was not polished like a graduate student's, nor hurried like a professor's margin scribble. It had the careful patience of someone unused to writing for others, almost childlike. He thought of the boy yesterday, Noah Mercer, shoes taped, eyes steady, a notebook full of strange grids. Clark's jaw tightened. "Impossible," he whispered. But the suspicion would not leave him. That afternoon, he sat at his desk with the note laid before him. He pulled a blank page toward himself and began to copy the drawing, testing the thought. He drew a grid of 9 points. In flat space, any row of 3 aligned neatly. But if the surface bent, if he imagined folding the plane like origami, then alignment became ambiguous. Mathematics demanded rigor. You could not simply say fold and expect a theorem, but vision always came first. Even Erdos, that restless wanderer of mathematics, spoke of seeing numbers like constellations. Clark sketched again, this time trying to formalize. Suppose we treated the grid as embedded in a higher dimensional manifold. Suppose folding meant mapping coordinates under a non-linear transformation. Then 3 points once equally spaced would shift, their arithmetic relation broken. It was nonsense, but also not nonsense. It was the kind of nonsense that once made his heart beat faster, long ago. He caught himself smiling, and quickly stopped. He shut the notebook, slid both pages back into the drawer, and locked it again. He must not let anyone know. That night, Clark stayed late in Maxwell Hall. The hallways were nearly empty. The cleaning crew moved quietly through the corridors, their carts rattling, their mops swishing. Clark heard the faint echo of a woman's humming, one of the janitors, no doubt, as he carried a stack of papers under his arm. When he reached his office, he hesitated. Something in him wanted to slip the folded note into the trash bin, to erase it. But his hand would not let go. Instead, he placed it in the pocket of his coat. On his way out, he passed the back stairwell. He glanced down. There, at the landing, sat Noah, waiting perhaps for his mother. The boy was hunched over his notebook, pencil scratching in the dim light. He didn't notice Clark at first. When he did, he closed the book quickly, hiding the page with his small hand. Clark's heart tightened. He almost spoke. He almost asked. But old caution pulled his lips shut. He continued down the stairs without a word. Noah watched him go, the faintest trace of sadness flickering in his eyes. Then he opened the notebook again and continued drawing, as if folds of space were the only language he knew. That night, in his small apartment, Clark sat at his dining table with the folded note laid before him again. He poured a glass of brandy, stared at the page, and whispered, "Maybe it's not about avoiding lines. Maybe it's about folding space." The words refused to leave his mind. They clung like a melody from a forgotten song, the kind you once loved, the kind you cannot escape. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. He was a professor at Harvard, once respected, now tolerated. His career was a line, straight, predictable, dull. But here, on a scrap of paper, was the first fold he had seen in years. And though he locked it away again, though he swore not to tell a soul, he knew his nights would no longer be quiet, because space, once folded, remembers. The hallways of Harvard gleamed in the morning light. Their walls, layered with generations of paint and memory, carried the scent of polish and old stone. To most, they were corridors of prestige, lined with portraits of scholars and donors. But to Rachel Mercer, they were just another shift. She pushed the cleaning cart slowly down the length of Maxwell Hall, the wheels squeaking faintly. Her hands were red from years of chemical cleaners. She tied her hair back, tucked loose strands behind her ear, and bent to wipe a smudge from the wall. It was her rhythm now. Sweep, scrub, polish, repeat. And walking just behind her was Noah. He carried his worn notebook, his pencil tucked in the spine, his small backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. While other children his age were in bright classrooms with lockers and recess bells, Noah's classroom was the echoing halls of Harvard. He stayed close to his mother because there was nowhere else for him to go. Rachel glanced back at him. "You brought the notebook again?" she said, half smiling. He nodded. "I thought maybe, if I have an idea." She sighed, not out of annoyance but of tenderness. "You always have ideas." He grinned faintly, his eyes large and bright. "Not always good ones." They stopped at the foot of a stairwell. Rachel set down her mop, leaning it against the wall. She took a deep breath, stretching her back. These shifts were longer since her husband passed, longer and lonelier. But she never complained aloud. She could not afford to. Rachel remembered the first time she brought Noah with her to work. It had been winter. Snow pressed hard against the windows, and their apartment's heater had broken. She couldn't leave him in the cold. So she bundled him in a too-big coat and carried him along. He was 7 then. He walked beside her down these same halls, his boots squeaking on the marble floors. That night she found him sitting cross-legged in an empty classroom, scribbling shapes on a chalkboard. She had laughed quietly, scolding him for making a mess. But when she wiped the board clean, she noticed the drawings weren't random. Lines connected in patterns, small grids with dots in neat order, a triangle, then a square, then something stranger. She hadn't understood it, but something in her chest had stirred. Now, 4 years later, he still carried that same notebook, its pages crowded with strange diagrams. And every time she looked at him bent over those sketches, she thought of his father. Her late husband, Daniel Mercer, had been a mechanic in Cambridge. His hands were always dirty with grease, his nails cracked, but his eyes, those were alive with curiosity. He used to spend nights hunched over old math textbooks, teaching himself trigonometry from library copies. He had once told Rachel, while tightening a bolt on a carburetor, "Numbers have music, Rach. You just have to listen long enough to hear the tune." But life was merciless. Daniel never got to study more formally. When Noah was 6, an accident at the garage took him away in a flash of sirens and silence. Rachel had been left with a child, a debt, and a grief so heavy she thought she might sink into it. Sometimes late at night she would wake and see Noah sleeping with a pencil still in his hand, grids and folds scrawled across the page, and she would whisper into the dark, "You have your father's fire. Just don't let it burn you." As they worked through the hall that morning, Rachel said, "Noah, you know this isn't your school. These people, they won't always welcome you." "I know," he said quietly, "but you sit in their classrooms." "I just want to hear," he replied. "When they talk, I can almost see the shapes in my head. It's like..." He paused, searching for words. It's like when you fold a napkin at home, only instead of cloth, it's space. The lines bend, and when they bend, new things show up. Rachel smiled sadly. You sound just like your dad. They walked in silence for a while. From down the hall came the shuffle of students, the sound of laughter, the chatter of lives not burdened by cleaning carts. Noah kept his head low, but his ears open. He soaked in every fragment of conversation like sunlight. Later that day, during her break, Rachel sat with him on a bench near the courtyard. She shared a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, half for him, half for her. Mom, Noah asked softly, did Dad really love math? Rachel's throat tightened. He loved it more than anything he never had. What do you mean? She looked out across the courtyard, the leaves drifting down in quiet spirals. He used to say the world never gave him a chance. He worked with his hands. He fixed engines, patched leaks. But in his mind, he was solving equations. He told me once, if he had been born in another life, he would have been a teacher. Noah chewed his sandwich slowly. Then he said, maybe I can finish what he started. Rachel looked at him. He was so small, his hair messy, his face still soft with childhood. But in his eyes was something she recognized, the same light Daniel once carried. Her heart ached with pride and fear. Maybe, she whispered, but don't lose yourself in it, Noah. Promise me that. He nodded, though neither of them fully believed it. That evening, Rachel worked a second shift at Maxwell Hall. The building was nearly empty. Students had gone home. Professors' offices were locked. The corridors echoed only with the sound of her mop sliding back and forth. Noah sat against the wall with his notebook. His pencil moved quickly, sketching folds across grids, arcs bending through rows of dots. The light from the ceiling cast a pale glow on his page. To him, the world outside faded. Only the quiet paper remained. Rachel glanced at him often. She worried. But she also felt something deeper, pride. She had little to give him. No tutors, no books of his own, no warm house with space to spread out. But she had given him this, a room to sit, a hallway to imagine, a mother's silent guard as he dreamed. She bent to wring out her mop, the water clouded with dust. Her back ached. Yet when she looked at Noah, she thought, maybe it was worth it. Maybe everything was worth it, if it meant keeping his fire alive. That night, as they walked home under the orange street lamps, Noah asked, Mom, do you think Dad would have been proud of me? Rachel held his hand, her palm rough, his fingers small. He would have been more than proud. He would have been amazed. Noah squeezed her hand. Then I'll keep going, even if they don't want me there. She didn't answer. She only pulled him closer as they walked. In her silence, in the rhythm of her steps, was her answer. And Noah, looking up at the tall brick towers of Harvard glowing in the distance, whispered to himself, one day, I'll belong here. For Mom. For Dad. For me. The lecture hall was silent that evening, emptied of its students. The chalkboards stood tall and green, their surfaces washed clean by the custodians earlier in the afternoon. The smell of chalk dust still lingered faintly, mingling with the polish of wooden seats. Noah sat alone near the front, his notebook open but forgotten on the desk. He stared at the vast expanse of the board, the way its surface seemed endless when there was no professor to fill it. Slowly, cautiously, he rose from his seat and picked up a piece of chalk. He stood on tiptoe to reach, his small hand trembling just slightly as he pressed white lines onto the surface. At first, he drew the familiar lattice, dots arranged like stars in a simple constellation, evenly spaced in rows and columns. Then, he paused, tilted his head, and began to curve them. He drew arcs, bending across the grid, folding the straight lines into crescents. To anyone else, it would have looked like doodling, but to Noah, it was vision. If the board itself isn't flat, he whispered to himself, then the rules are different. He traced 3 points in a row, equally spaced, then bent the board's imaginary surface so that the line broke apart, the 3 no longer aligned. Not avoiding, he murmured, just folding. The chalk squeaked. His eyes narrowed in concentration. For a boy of 11, the effort was enormous, not because of the mathematics, but because of the weight of silence pressing down on him. In this hall, ideas were supposed to belong to grown men with titles. Yet here he was, drawing folds as if they might listen. Behind him, the door opened. Professor Adrian Clark entered, carrying a folder of notes. He froze. On the board, white arcs spiraled across the grid. And standing there, small, slight, earnest, was the janitor's boy. For a heartbeat, Clark did not move. The sight struck him with the sharpness of recognition. It was the same vision that had haunted him years ago, the same whispers of bending space. He felt as though he were staring into a mirror that reflected his younger self, but in the fragile shape of a child. Noah turned, startled, chalk still in hand. His eyes widened, then dropped to the floor. I was just... Clark stepped forward, his voice low. What do you think you're doing? Noah swallowed. I was only drawing, sir. Clark's gaze flickered over the board. The boy's words were simple, but the picture was not. The lines curved with intention. They suggested more than a child's game. He felt an unease in his chest, admiration struggling with fear. What did you say just now? Clark asked. Noah hesitated, then repeated softly, What if the grid itself isn't flat? The room grew very still. Clark's breath caught, though he hid it quickly. That sentence, that question, was precisely the kind of shift in thought that mathematicians spent lifetimes searching for. Not an answer, not a proof, but a way of seeing. Clark stared at the boy. For a fleeting instant, warmth flickered inside him, the urge to encourage, to nurture. But then another memory surged. The cruel laughter of colleagues, the rejection of his own youthful ideas, the humiliation of having dared to see differently. He felt again the sharp sting of being told he was foolish, and so he closed the door inside himself. Leave that, he said, his tone flat. These boards are not for games. Noah's hand tightened on the chalk. He wanted to explain, to tell Clark what he saw. But the weight of authority pressed down on him harder than any theorem. Slowly, he set the chalk back in the tray. I'm sorry, he whispered. Clark turned away, shuffling through his folder as if the boy no longer existed. Yet behind his stiff motions, his mind was burning. The drawing, the folds, the words, they gnawed at him like a melody he couldn't silence. Noah picked up his notebook, hugged it close to his chest, and began to leave. At the doorway, he glanced back once. The professor stood rigidly at the desk, his back turned, but his shoulders were taut, betraying the storm within. The boy slipped away, the sound of his footsteps fading down the marble hall. Later that night, Clark remained alone in the lecture hall. The chalkboard still bore the curved lines, faint under the dim lights. He approached it slowly, his fingers hovering near the drawings. He whispered the boy's words to himself. What if the grid itself isn't flat? He almost smiled. Almost. But instead he lifted the eraser, pressed it to the board, and swept the lines away. Yet as the white dust fell, he knew the thought could not be erased. Downstairs, Rachel found Noah waiting for her in the corridor. She noticed the faint white dust on his sleeve. "Were you drawing again?" she asked gently. Noah looked at her, unsure whether to admit it. At last, he nodded. On the big board. Rachel brushed his shoulder with her hand. She wanted to scold him, but instead she whispered, "Your father used to do the same. Every wall was a board to him." Noah smiled faintly. They walked home together under the darkening sky, and in Maxwell Hall, Professor Clark sat alone in the echoing silence, haunted by the fold he had erased but could still see clearly in his mind's eye. Rumors move differently at Harvard. They don't shout, they whisper, carried by the rustle of papers, the shuffle of shoes, the clink of coffee cups in the common room. They travel in small fragments, a glance here, a phrase there, and by the time they reach the right ears, they have already changed shape. In the days after Clark caught Noah at the chalkboard, something began to stir. Students noticed their professor was distracted. His lectures, once sharp and cutting, now wandered into long silences. He would stop mid-sentence, staring at the board as though seeing something no one else could. He erased and rewrote the same equation 3 times. He quoted his own old words, "We must see differently," without realizing. The graduate students exchanged looks. "He's working on something," one said. "Late nights again." Another shrugged. "Or he's chasing ghosts. He never got over the capsid embarrassment." A third leaned in, voice lower. "I heard he has a new source. Some outside idea." They laughed uneasily. At Harvard, a new idea was currency. But if it came from the wrong source, it was scandal. Noah, meanwhile, kept to the shadows. He still came with his mother in the evenings, sitting quietly with his notebook while she polished the floors. But now, when he opened the pages, he was not only drawing folds, he was reading. Because one night, someone had noticed. Marissa Hale found him in the corridor, sitting cross-legged near a vending machine, scribbling by the glow of the overhead lamp. She approached carefully, as if stepping into a fragile circle. "Hey," she said softly. Noah looked up, startled. He clutched the notebook against his chest. "I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to—" Marissa shook her head. "Relax, I know who you are. You're the boy who left the drawing in lecture, aren't you?" Noah froze. "How do you know that?" "I saw it," she replied simply. "I knew it wasn't Clark's. He doesn't draw like that anymore." Noah's cheeks flushed. "It was just an idea." Marissa crouched to his level. Her eyes, warm but intent, searched his. An idea can be more than enough. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small USB stick, and placed it in his hand. "Here. These are old research papers, failed attempts, forgotten drafts, half-written notes. Stuff about the capsid problem and related things. Nobody reads them anymore, but maybe you should." Noah blinked. "Why me?" "Because," Marissa said with a smile, "you're already asking the right questions." That night, Noah stayed awake under the dim bulb of their rented room, laptop borrowed from a neighbor across the hall. He inserted the USB, the screen filling with folders of PDFs and scanned notes. The language was dense, filled with terms he didn't yet know. Combinatorial density, arithmetic progressions, Fourier methods. He whispered the words aloud, sounding them out like new music. Arithmetic progression. Numbers evenly spaced, like 3, 6, 9. He understood that part. But why avoid them? Why fight against such neatness? As he read, his pencil never stopped moving. He drew grids, marked points, then folded them, bending the rules. He tried to imagine what Mod 3 meant. He doodled 3 apples, then wrapped the count back around. 1, 2, 0, 1 again. He laughed softly to himself. It was like playing a game where the board wrapped into a loop. Rachel stirred in her sleep. She turned toward him. "Noah, love, it's late," she murmured. He lowered the screen brightness. "Just a little longer, Mom." She drifted back to dreams. Noah stayed awake, the lines on the screen burning into him. For the first time, he felt he wasn't only drawing for himself. He was answering someone, building on others, entering a conversation that had started long before he was born. The next day, the whispers grew louder. In the hallway outside Clark's office, 2 graduate students argued quietly. "He's getting ideas from somewhere. You can tell. His proofs look different." Different how? Not like his. Too imaginative. He's hiding something. Behind a column, Noah heard every word. He hugged his notebook tighter, his pulse quickening. They couldn't know, could they? No one would believe a janitor's son was feeding ideas to a Harvard professor. It sounded absurd. And yet the fear pressed into his chest like a stone. That evening, Marissa found him again. She sat beside him on the cold steps of Maxwell Hall. "You read them?" she asked. Noah nodded eagerly. "Some, not all. There are words I don't know, but I think they all try to stop the lines, to block the threes. I don't want to block them. I want to bend them." She tilted her head. "Explain." He pulled his notebook open, showing her a page filled with curved grids. "Look, 3 points in a row, evenly spaced. That's bad, right?" "Right. But if the surface folds..." He bent the paper slightly in his hands, creasing it into a shallow arc. "Now those 3 aren't in a straight line anymore. The rule changes, the problem changes. And maybe the solution is simpler." Marissa stared at the bent paper. She felt something shift inside her, like a door opening. "You're seeing the problem differently," she whispered. Noah smiled shyly. "I don't know the right words yet, but I can see it." She touched the folded page, her fingers brushing his. "Then we'll find the words together." Meanwhile, in his office, Clark reread the folded note for the 100th time. He told himself he would throw it away, but he never did. The whisper it carried had already taken root. He knew deep down it was not his own voice. The old wound inside him ached. He had once been that boy, dreaming of folds and new ways of seeing. And the world had crushed him. Could he allow himself to listen again, even if the voice came from a child with taped shoes? He poured a glass of brandy, leaned back in his chair, and muttered, "What are you doing to me, Noah Mercer?" By week's end, the whispers had reached the senior faculty. Questions rose. Some wondered if Clark was stealing. Others wondered if he had finally rediscovered his edge. Noah, unaware of how close danger was, sat in the dim light with Marissa's USB, filling his notebook with folds. Rachel, watching from the doorway, felt both fear and pride. "You look like your father," she whispered. Noah looked up. Did Dad ever feel like he was close to something big? Rachel nodded. Every day, even if the world never let him finish. Noah turned back to his notebook. His pencil moved fast, like he was racing time. "Then maybe it's my turn." Rachel leaned against the frame, her heart torn between hope and dread. She knew something was coming. The air around her son felt charged, like a storm building just beyond the horizon. And in Harvard's halls, the whispers grew louder. The Library of Widener stood like a cathedral of knowledge, its stone pillars rising solemnly into the Boston sky. Students hurried in and out, arms heavy with books, their voices low as if reverence were demanded here. Noah had never entered on his own before. Normally, his mother's staff badge allowed him only into the halls she cleaned. But today, Marissa Hale slipped him quietly through a side entrance, whispering, "Stay close." The air inside smelled of dust and paper, old wood and ink. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, striking golden patches across endless shelves. Noah's eyes widened. It was as if the world had cracked open to reveal its heart. Marissa led him to a small corner where graduate theses were bound in thick volumes, their spines marked with names and dates. She pulled one down, faded maroon leather, stamped 1995. She laid it before him. On the cover, Adrian Clark, Department of Mathematics. Noah traced the letters with his finger. "Professor Clark?" Marissa nodded. "His doctoral dissertation. I thought you should see it." They opened it together. The first pages were dense, filled with equations, matrices, and diagrams of points arranged in grids. The handwriting, scanned and bound, was younger, more reckless, more hopeful. Clark's words leapt off the page. "The capsit problem cannot be solved by counting alone. We must look at the geometry of space itself. We must see differently, not count differently." Noah's heart jumped. It was almost the same as what he had said at the chalkboard. He looked up at Marissa, his eyes bright. "He thought about folds, too." "Maybe," Marissa said softly. "Or at least, he once dreamed like you do." They turned more pages. Clark had drawn grids bending into arcs, surfaces tilted like folded napkins. His reasoning was incomplete, but alive with imagination. Yet the later chapters grew more formal, more defensive, as if responding to unseen criticism. The final conclusion was short, almost bitter. "This approach, though promising in spirit, cannot be made rigorous with current tools. I submit it here as a failure." Noah frowned. "But it wasn't a failure. It was just unfinished." Marissa smiled sadly. "The committee didn't see it that way. He was laughed at, Noah. He lost his chance to be the dreamer. After that, he became what he is now." That evening, Noah sat outside Maxwell Hall, the dissertation balanced on his knees. He flipped through it again and again, tracing the faded pencil diagrams. He whispered Clark's words aloud. "See differently, not count differently." It was like hearing his own thoughts spoken back to him, but in a grown man's voice, weary with time. He felt a strange kinship with Clark, like two travelers separated by decades but walking the same hidden road. Rachel found him there, her mop still in her hand. "What's that?" she asked gently. "A book," Noah said, eyes never leaving the page. "Professor Clark wrote it when he was young. He was like me, Mom. He saw the folds, too." Rachel sat beside him, her back against the cool stone wall. She looked at the thick book in his lap, the complicated marks she couldn't understand. What she saw instead was her boy's face lit with wonder. "You should be careful," she murmured. "Dreams can hurt." Noah shook his head. "Dreams are the only thing I have." Later that week, Noah carried the dissertation into Clark's office. He had waited until the hallway was quiet, until most students had gone. The professor sat behind his desk, his shoulders bent under the weight of another long day. Noah placed the book gently on the table. "I read this." Clark looked down. His face drained of color. His hand twitched, almost as if he might slam the book shut. "Where did you get that?" "The library," Noah said simply. Clark stared at him for a long moment, his eyes sharp but also pained. "You had no right." Noah opened the book to a page with curved grids. He pointed at the drawing. "You saw it too. The folds. You wrote, 'We must see differently.' That's what I thought too." Clark's jaw tightened. His voice, when it came, was cold. "You don't understand. That was 30 years ago. I was humiliated. They tore it apart. They told me I was naive, childish. Do you know what it feels like to be laughed at by the world you wanted to belong to?" Noah held his gaze. His small voice was steady. "I think I do." The room fell into silence. Clark's breath caught. For an instant, the wall inside him cracked, and he saw the boy not as an intruder, but as a mirror. The same fire. The same danger. He closed the dissertation, his hand heavy on the cover. "You should forget it, Noah. You should forget me." Noah shook his head. "I can't. Because you were right. It's not about counting. It's about seeing." Clark turned away, staring at the window. His reflection in the glass looked old, tired, almost broken. He whispered, almost to himself, "I was right too soon, and the world has no patience for those who dream too soon." Noah left quietly, the sound of his small footsteps fading. Clark sat alone, the old dissertation still warm where the boy's hands had touched it. He pressed his fingers against the leather cover, and for the first time in years, he felt tears threaten his eyes. That night, Rachel found Noah sitting cross-legged on the floor of their small room, papers spread around him. He was copying Clark's diagrams, refining them, adding folds of his own. "Noah," she whispered, "why do you keep working on this?" He looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than his years. "Because Dad never had the chance. Because Professor Clark gave up. And because maybe I can finish what they couldn't." Rachel knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently back from his forehead. Her voice trembled. "My love, promise me one thing. Promise me you won't let their cruelty take your heart." Noah nodded, though in his chest he wasn't sure. And above them, outside their window, Harvard's towers glowed faintly in the night. Inside Maxwell Hall, Adrian Clark sat alone, staring at his own past bound in leather. The boy had found it, touched it, carried it forward. The past was no longer buried. And Clark, whether he wanted to or not, felt himself being pulled back into the fold. The nights at Maxwell Hall belonged to silence. By day, the lecture rooms rang with voices and chalk scratching, but when evening fell, the corridors emptied. Only the sound of janitors' carts, the squeak of mop wheels, and the faint hum of the heating system remained. It was during those nights that a quiet exchange began. Clark could not ignore the boy anymore. Noah's words echoed in him, so painfully close to the dreams he had once carried. And Noah, though timid, could not resist the pull of the chalkboards, the call of folds waiting to be drawn, so they began to communicate in the only way both of them trusted, through paper. One night, after a long lecture, Clark slipped a sheet under the office door before leaving. It was not addressed, not signed, but Noah found it. On it was a grid of 9 points with a question written beneath. Can a fold preserve symmetry while breaking alignment? Noah carried the paper back to the corner where his mother was cleaning. He bent over his notebook, chewing his pencil. He drew an arc bending through the points, folding them into a curve. Then he folded the paper itself, creasing it gently, aligning 2 corners. He wrote beneath, "Yes, if the fold respects distance, but changes direction." The next evening, he slid his answer under Clark's door. And so it began. Days turned into weeks. By daylight, Clark remained the stern professor, speaking in measured tones, his chalk clicking briskly across the board. He did not glance at the back row, where Noah sometimes slipped quietly to listen. But at night, when the halls emptied, A different dialogue bloomed. Clark left sketches, lattices mapped into arcs, equations half-written, fragments of abandoned proofs. Noah replied with childlike diagrams, folded grids, curves drawn with shaky lines. Sometimes Clark wrote questions in the margins. What happens when the fold overlaps itself? Noah would answer, then space remembers. 2 points become neighbors who never were. Other times, Noah asked questions of his own. Can 3 in a row vanish if the paper bends into a sphere? And Clark, after staring at the words for long minutes, would write, yes. In curved geometry, straight lines do not exist. They become geodesics, paths bent by the surface. Perhaps the capsit problem should be asked on a sphere, not a plane. Their pages crossed back and forth, slipping under the door like secret letters between prisoners of the same dream. Rachel noticed first. She saw the new shadows under her son's eyes, the way his pencil raced late into the night. She found sheets of paper scattered on the floor, filled with folds and strange notations. She saw the quiet fire in him, brighter than ever, but also more consuming. Noah, she whispered one night, brushing his hair as he hunched over the desk. You must sleep. I will, he said softly. Just one more fold. Her heart ached. She remembered Daniel, her late husband, staying up past midnight, oil-stained hands flipping through math books borrowed from the library. He, too, had whispered, just one more page, Rach. And he, too, had burned himself down in pursuit of something the world never gave him time to finish. Rachel stood in the doorway, torn between fear and pride. She could not stop Noah. All she could do was place a cup of warm milk beside him, a silent offering of care in the midst of his storm. For Clark, the collaboration was both torment and salvation. In the privacy of his office, he unfolded Noah's responses with trembling hands. At first, he scoffed. The boy's drawings were crude, imprecise. But beneath the crooked lines was clarity, vision, the kind of vision he had once had himself. One night he whispered aloud, you see what I once saw, but you aren't afraid. The words stung. Clark had lived his career with fear disguised as caution, but this boy, with no training, no title, dared to fold the universe in his small notebook. Clark began to respond with more than sketches. He wrote explanations in the margins, words simple enough for a child, but carrying weight. An arithmetic progression is 3 numbers equally spaced, like 2, 5, 8. Mathematicians fear them because they appear everywhere, hiding in the grid. But if you fold, the hiding place shifts. Then the rules must be rewritten. Noah devoured the words, copying them carefully into his own notebook, building a private dictionary. Progression, geodesic, modulo. Each term became a tool in his hands, paired with the folds of his imagination. Their silent dialogue grew more daring. One evening, Clark left a half-page of equations, unfinished, trailing off with uncertainty. Noah, biting his lips, stared at them for hours. Then he drew a fold across the symbols, turning an equation into a shape, as if the algebra itself had been bent. When Clark saw it the next morning, something inside him cracked open. He laughed, quietly, bitterly, but also joyfully. For the first time in years, he felt alive in his work. He pressed his hand to the paper and whispered, "You and I, Noah Mercer, are speaking a language no one else has yet heard." But secrets, like folds, have sharp edges. Clark knew the risk. If anyone discovered his strange correspondence with the janitor's son, he would be mocked, maybe ruined again. He had already been burned once by daring to see differently. He couldn't survive another humiliation. So he told himself it was temporary. He would learn what he could, then stop. He would not let himself care. Yet each night, When he unlocked the drawer and found another folded paper waiting, he felt a small warmth in his chest. The warmth of being understood, not by colleagues, not by peers, but by a boy no one else believed in. One late night, as Rachel finished mopping the marble stairwell, she saw Clark pass by. He paused when he noticed Noah curled in the corner, asleep over his notebook. Rachel's eyes met Clark's. For the first time, the professor did not look away. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of sternness, regret, and something softer. He nodded once, a gesture almost of respect, then walked on. Rachel knelt, pulled the notebook gently from beneath Noah's cheek, and whispered to herself, "Don't break him, Professor. Please don't break him." And so the silent collaboration continued. In folded papers, slipped under doors, in chalk lines erased before morning, in words simple enough for a boy but heavy enough to stir an old man's heart, a partnership was forming, one that neither dared admit aloud. For Noah, it was the beginning of a dream. For Clark, it was the return of a ghost. And for Harvard, though no one knew it yet, it was the start of a story whispered between the cracks of its ancient walls. Whispers have a way of growing sharper when envy is near. For weeks, Clark's students had noticed the shift in his lectures, the spark in his eyes, the strange new diagrams that appeared and disappeared on the chalkboard. He had grown restless again, almost inspired, as though chasing something just beyond reach. At first, the graduate students only watched. But envy is a seed, and Harvard's halls are fertile ground. One evening, in the common room outside Maxwell Hall, a student named Richard Kent leaned over his coffee. "Have you noticed? Clark's papers look different lately." "Different how?" another asked. "Too creative." "Too alive," Richard sneered. "That man hasn't had a fresh thought in 20 years. Someone's feeding him." The others laughed nervously. But Richard's eyes burned. He had spent months drafting proofs that led nowhere, and now Clark was scribbling diagrams that seemed to move past the grid itself. Richard wanted to know why. It happened one late night. Clark had left his office door slightly ajar, distracted as he carried papers to the copier. Richard, passing by, noticed. He hesitated only a moment before slipping inside. On the desk lay a stack of sketches, crude, childlike grids with arcs and folds bending through them. Richard frowned. They were too rough, too clumsy to belong to Clark. And yet they pulsed with a strange elegance. At the top of one page was written in small, uneven handwriting, "If we fold, 3 points can vanish." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Who wrote this?" he whispered. His gaze drifted to the wastebasket. Inside were crumpled sheets, some bearing the same small handwriting, some with Clark's careful notes responding in the margins. A conversation, not between professors, not between graduate students, but between Clark and someone else. He stuffed a few pages into his bag and slipped out, his heart pounding. The next morning, rumors spread like fire. By mid-afternoon, faculty members had heard whispers. Clark was using ideas that weren't his. Some said he had found an anonymous collaborator. Others muttered the word plagiarism. Clark was summoned to a closed meeting with the department council. He sat stiffly in his chair, the papers spread before him. "Professor Clark," the chair began, "we've received troubling reports. Some of your recent notes contain handwriting that is not your own. Who is the source of these ideas?" Clark's throat tightened. He felt the walls closing in. He could admit the truth, that a janitor's son, an 11-year-old boy, was the author of insights no graduate student had dared to dream. But the thought of speaking Noah's name aloud, of throwing him into the cruel jaws of this institution, was unbearable. So Clark remained silent. "Are you claiming these notes as your own?" another faculty member pressed. Clark hesitated. His silence was an answer in itself. The room buzzed with suspicion. "We will expect clarification," the chair said sternly. "Until then, your work will be under review." Clark left the room pale, his hands trembling. That evening, Noah found him standing in the hallway, his eyes hollow. "What happened?" Noah asked. Clark looked down at him, torn between fury and despair. "Someone found our notes. They know." Noah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They're questioning me, questioning where the ideas come from." Clark's voice broke. "And your name is already in the whispers, Noah. Someone mentioned a boy. They don't know it's you yet, but they will." Noah felt the blood drain from his face. He thought of the students' laughter, the professor's cold words, the way Harvard had looked at him before, not as a thinker, but as a mistake. If they discovered it was him, the ridicule would be merciless. "I never wanted trouble," Noah whispered. "I only wanted to help." Clark turned away, his jaw clenched. He hated himself in that moment, for dragging the boy into his broken world, for letting envy and suspicion find them. He had wanted to protect Noah, to keep their quiet collaborations safe. Now the walls were collapsing. Meanwhile, Richard Kent fanned the flames. In hushed conversations with other students, he waved the copied notes like proof of betrayal. "Look at this handwriting. Look at these childish drawings. Clark is passing someone else's sketches as his own. He's desperate. And we all know desperation is the enemy of truth." The whispers grew into accusations. By the week's end, half the department believed Clark was stealing ideas from an unnamed source. Some joked cruelly, "Maybe he's working with a prodigy janitor." They laughed, but the joke carried a sting of recognition. That night, in their small rented room, Noah sat with his notebook unopened. Rachel noticed immediately. "You're not drawing," she said softly. Noah shook his head. "They know, Mom. They know I've been helping. They'll laugh at me." Rachel set aside the laundry basket, knelt in front of him, and cupped his face in her hands. "Noah, listen to me. You are not a shame. You are a gift. If they laugh, it is because they are afraid of you. Don't let their fear become yours." Tears stung his eyes. "But what if Professor Clark blames me?" Rachel hesitated. She had seen Clark's eyes the other night, hard but also haunted. "I don't think he will. I think he's already been hurt once, and he knows better now." Noah buried his face against her shoulder. She held him tightly, her own tears hidden in his hair. In Maxwell Hall, Clark sat alone at his desk, the crumpled sketches spread before him. He unfolded one of Noah's pages, the handwriting small but determined. If space folds, then maybe it remembers. Clark closed his eyes. He could almost hear Noah's voice in the room with him, earnest and unafraid. He whispered to himself, "If they come for him, I'll take the blame." The decision settled in him like a stone, heavy, inevitable. Because Clark knew, the boy had already given him more than mathematics. He had given him back his courage to dream. And dreams, once awakened, could not be silenced. The council at Harvard was divided. Some wanted Clark suspended, others demanded transparency, and a few, secretly curious, wished to see the mysterious source for themselves. After long debate, they reached a compromise. A temporary badge. For 1 week only, Noah Mercer would be granted the title Visitor Scholar. It was a gesture, half mocking, half reluctant, as if the institution itself was daring him to prove he belonged. When Rachel was told, she clutched the badge in her hand as though it might burn her. The laminated card was thin, but the weight of it felt enormous. Visitor. The word reminded her that this world still did not see her son as one of its own. But Noah's eyes lit with wonder. "They want me to speak?" he asked, hardly believing. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, but only once." The day of the presentation, Maxwell Hall was packed. Students filled every seat. Professors lined the walls, their arms crossed, expressions guarded. Whispers buzzed. The janitor's son. A child, 11 years old. "This is ridiculous." At the front, Clark stood stiffly, his face unreadable. He had fought for this moment, though he would never admit it aloud. He glanced at Noah, small, nervous, clutching his notebook, and a flicker of protectiveness crossed his eyes. Rachel sat in the very back, her cleaning uniform still on. Her hands trembled in her lap. She prayed silently that the boy's courage would not shatter. Noah walked to the chalkboard. His shoes squeaked softly. He felt every gaze like a weight pressing on his chest. For a moment he almost froze. But then he remembered the nights in their tiny apartment, the milk his mother placed by his side, the folded notes under Clark's door. He thought of his father, who had dreamed of this place but never stepped inside. He took a breath, lifted the chalk, and began. "I know I don't belong here," Noah said softly. The room stilled. "But I want to show you what I see." He drew a simple grid of points. "This is what mathematicians call the capset problem. Choose as many points as possible, but don't let 3 fall in a row, evenly spaced." He paused, turning to the audience. 3 in a row, like 3 chairs in a line, or 3 trees planted with equal gaps. Mathematicians avoid these. They count carefully to prevent them. He drew 3 points in a straight line. But what if instead of avoiding, we fold? The chalk curved across the board, bending the line into an arc. He pressed his palm gently against the board, as if shaping invisible paper. "If the grid itself isn't flat," he said, his voice stronger now, "then the row disappears. The rule changes because the surface changes. A fold creates a new kind of geometry." The room was silent, not mocking, not laughing. Silent. Noah continued, his words halting but earnest. He drew curves wrapping through the grid, points pulled closer together by invisible bends. In flat space, 3 evenly spaced points are everywhere. They are a trap. But when space folds, distances change. The trap loosens. Maybe the problem isn't about avoiding patterns. Maybe it's about reshaping the space that holds them. He stepped back, the chalk dust white on his fingers. "I don't know the theorems yet. I don't have the big words, but I think space remembers folds, and maybe that memory is the key." For a long breath, no one moved. Then someone in the back coughed, shifting uncomfortably, but still, there was no laughter. Only silence, heavy and electric. Marissa Hale, standing against the wall, felt her throat tighten. She wanted to cheer, to break the stillness with applause, but something in her knew the silence itself was a deeper respect than noise. Clark finally stepped forward. He looked at Noah, then at the board. His voice was steady. "Thank you, Noah. That will be enough." Noah lowered the chalk. His knees trembled. He wanted to run back to his mother, to collapse into her arms. But he stood tall until the whispers began again, softer this time, not cruel but contemplative. That evening, Rachel held her son tightly. "You were brave," she whispered. "I was scared," Noah admitted. "That's what bravery is," she said. "Being scared, but still standing." She kissed the top of his head, her tears falling into his hair. Across campus, Clark sat alone in his office. He replayed the scene in his mind, the boy's small figure against the vast chalkboard, the words that echoed his own youth. He had felt something stir in the hall, a silence he hadn't heard in decades. It was not mockery, it was not dismissal, it was possibility. He pulled Noah's folded notes from his drawer, spread them across the desk, and whispered, "The world will remember this." But in his chest he feared what came next. Harvard did not forgive easily, and a boy with taped shoes, who had spoken of folds before its scholars, had disrupted the careful order of its world. The week of Noah's visitor badge had only begun, and already the air felt different. The week of Noah's visitor badge passed like a fragile dream. Each day he slipped into Maxwell Hall with his mother's careful watch. Each day he sat quietly, sometimes answering a professor's cautious question, sometimes only watching. The whispers never stopped, but the laughter had faded. In its place was something heavier, awe mixed with disbelief. By the end of the week, the council demanded clarity. Professor Clark stood before a full lecture hall, his notes untouched. Faculty filled the front rows. Students crowded the aisles. Rachel Mercer, still in her uniform, sat near the back, her hands twisting in her lap. Noah stood beside her, clutching his notebook. Clark's eyes swept the room. He felt the weight of years pressing on him, the rejection of his youth, the humiliation that had hardened him, the secret nights of folded notes with a boy who should never have had to fight so hard for a chance. He cleared his throat. "There has been speculation," he began, "about the source of the diagrams, the folds, the new approach you have all seen. I will answer plainly." He paused. His gaze shifted to the boy at the back. Noah's eyes were wide, afraid, but steady. "These folds are not mine," Clark said. His voice did not waver. "They are Noah Mercer's." A ripple spread through the room. Shock. Murmurs. Heads turned toward the boy. Noah froze, his cheeks burning. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Clark continued, "I was once told to stop dreaming. I obeyed. But this boy, the son of a custodian, dared to dream again. He has seen what I could not finish. He has reminded me, reminded all of us, that mathematics is not only counting. It is vision, and vision can come from anywhere." The hall fell silent. For a long moment, there was no sound but the faint hum of the lights above. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Another followed. Soon, the hall erupted into applause, not the polite applause of formality, but the kind that rises from respect reluctantly won. Rachel wept openly, her shoulders shaking. Noah looked down at his shoes, unable to believe it, then up at the board where his folds had once lived. Clark turned back to him. For the first time, his stern eyes softened. He nodded. Weeks later, a small brass plaque was mounted on the wall of Maxwell Hall. It read, "In honor of Noah Mercer, whose vision of folds reminded us to see differently." Rachel stood before it with trembling hands. She touched the cool metal, her tears falling freely. Beside her, Noah whispered, "For you, Mom, because you cleaned the room I learned in." She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. Years passed. Noah Mercer's name spread far beyond Harvard. His papers on folded vector spaces traveled the world, sparking debates, conferences, and entire new branches of thought. Some praised him as a prodigy. Others resisted, clinging to the safety of old definitions. But no one could ignore him. Through it all, Noah remained quiet, still carrying his worn notebook. He published, he lectured, he traveled. But in every place he visited, he left behind a folded scrap of paper with a single question scrawled on it. What if space remembers the fold? Clark, older now, watched his former student, no, his secret partner, grow into the mathematician he himself had once wanted to be. He bore the criticism of his colleagues with calm. He had spoken the truth, and the truth had freed him. One afternoon, years after that fateful week, he sat in Maxwell Hall with Rachel. The plaque gleamed in the sunlight. "He has done what neither of us could," Clark said softly. Rachel smiled, her eyes shining. "He carried both of you with him." And Noah, standing once more at the chalkboard years later, facing a new generation of students, thought of that first night when he had whispered, "What if the grid isn't flat?" He lifted the chalk and drew a fold. The room stilled, just as it had the first time, and in that silence lived not only mathematics, but memory. The memory of a boy in taped shoes, of a mother who scrubbed the floors of Harvard, and of a professor who finally chose to open the door again. Because folds once made are never truly forgotten. Space remembers, and so do we. If you've stayed with Noah's story until this very moment, thank you. Truly. You've carried his journey with your own quiet patience, the same way his mother carried her son through the long halls of Harvard. These stories are not just about mathematics. They are about all of us. About struggle. About love that survives loss. About daring to dream even when the world says you don't belong. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own battles, or your own dreams that never quite faded, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, so we can keep walking together through stories that warm the heart and honor the human spirit. Because in the end, knowledge isn't just numbers on a board. It is memory, it is legacy, and it is love passed on. Thank you for being here. You are part of this fold now.